human-alien hybrids living on Earth is the subject of an extraordinary non-fiction book published in 2005 entitled Rachel's Eyes by Helen Luttrell and Jean Bilodeau. Jean has been investigating animal mutilations, crop formations, and UFOs for years. Helen is the mother of a girl she calls Marissa in the book. That is not her real name. Marissa was blinded by diabetes as a teenager but wanted to go to college on her own. At age 20 in the spring of 1972, Marissa was accepted by American River College in Sacramento. American River College is a community college founded in 1955 and located in northeastern Sacramento, California. The current 2014 enrollment is 35,000 full-time and part-time students, making it one of the largest community colleges in California. An unusual female roommate showed up with a Colonel Harry Nadine from Mathers Air Force Base. The girl was named Rachel, R-A-E-C-H-E-L, Nadine, and was introduced as the Colonel's daughter to Marissa. Neither name that is used in this book is a true name to protect the request for confidentiality, but the unusual spelling, R-A-E-C-H-E-L, with the Colonel's actual last name proved in military records, was confirmed as an enrolled student in the spring of 1972 by the American River College Dean of Enrollment Services. This enrollment confirmation letter, dated January 10, 2000, was in response to Helen Luttrell's and Jean Bilodeau's inquiry to see if Rachel Nadine, with an N, the letter is covered over in this letter at Helen's request, the first real letter, that Rachel Nadine had actually been enrolled in the college. Co-authors Luttrell and Bilodeau changed most name spellings in their book, including these false names, Rachel and Harry Nadine. The Colonel would eventually tell Helen and Marissa that he had worked since 1956 in a humanization program of ET human hybrids at a highly classified underground facility called Four Corners near Rachel, Nevada. That Rachel is spelled normally, R-A-C-H-E-L, at the northern edge of Area 51, Groom Lake, Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. So this is not the historic Four Corners where Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona come together. It's another example, I think. Oh, sorry. This is not the historic Four Corners where Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and Arizona come together, but it's another example of how the government had three project blue books. You may not know that. One was really directed by the CIA, Fort Belvoir, that I talked about in the citizens' hearing of the man that I interviewed for 3 days in 1998, who worked in that program, and it's a big, long story. Then there were two other Project Blue books. It's mix and match, follow the P in the shell. If you have a lot of names, and then you have an access code that will have the only people who have a need to know, they're the only ones that get to the real information. So to have a bunch of Four Corners, or even a bunch of Area 51s, or a bunch of Dreamlands, or Project Bluebirds, that's part of how counterintelligence makes sure that that which is classified above top secret, or it is a special access project, that's part of the way that they keep it away from you, Congress, and the world. That pink circle is Rachel. That is north of the Navy's Groom Lake. You can see that down where I've got a pink line under Area 51, right next to Groom Lake in the big Nellis Air Force Range. And you can see how big it extends. The area where the aliens have always been described are in that Area 51, Groom Lake, and the Papoose Mountain Range, which is nearby. Colonel Nadine from Mather Air Force Base, Sacramento, confirmed by Helen Luttrell, who worked at the time in another Air Force office. She wanted to check up on this colonel that brought this strange girl to the college that got assigned to be a roommate with her blind daughter, Marissa. She checked out and found that this colonel with his real name, she was using Harry Nadine in the book. It's a name that sounds like this. So we know that he was at least working through Mathers Air Force Base in Sacramento. And so I won't forget it later, after all of what I'm going to tell you and share you, he disappeared. His entire military file disappeared. And it shows that the military is dipping in and dipping out of some of these programs, and they can have, they might be NSA, but they are operating as a colonel in an Air Force with a name, and they have a file and a record, and for those of us who need paper trails, we can find something, and then it all disappears. And then what are you left with? You can't prove. On purpose. This is a quote from Colonel Nadine to Helen Luttrell. The humanization program was a MAGI, M-A-J-I, that is the code for Majestic 12 and all magic-related extraterrestrial matters. The humanization program was a MAGI project to see how well beings from another planet could be integrated into our Earth society. It was also an interspecies hybrid breeding program on Earth and another planet. Some of us have gone there, and a whole lot of them are here. Close quote. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines hybrid as, quote, an offspring of two animals or plants of different races, breeds, varieties, species, or genera, close quote. Colonel Nadine told Helen Luttrell and her blind daughter Marissa that the humanization program tried to teach extraterrestrial human hybrids how to fit into modern human Earth society. The colonel told Helen Luttrell and her daughter Marissa that Rachel was one of the alien hybrids who came from Zeta Reticuli 1, about 39 light years from Earth, in that binary star system in which both suns are like Earth's sun. And we talked about the 16 stars before that include our sun, and that they are all spectral class G, which could support life, ours included. Our sun is at the edge of the group with 82 Eridani, Gliese 86, and Zeta Reticuli near the central region. The arrows indicate the distance in light years between suns, and the numbers in parentheses indicate distance from our sun. And getting to Zeta Reticuli, if you can bend space and time, would not be a huge challenge. Helen Luttrell says that she saw for herself the Area 51 entrance that Colonel Harry Nadine took her to. He wanted her to see where Rachel had come from Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 to the Earth, and had been raised and living in the underground installation at the Four Corners Humanization Program that was disguised on the surface as old falling down farm buildings and a barn. He said if you went down the road, you would be looking at a dilapidated farm, and you would have no idea that one of those farm buildings was the access to the most advanced, large, laboratory complex on this planet. The small town of Rachel was not far away. When Colonel Nadine brought Rachel to American River College and then to Marissa's apartment, Helen worked teletypes at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento. Through a military colleague, she was able to confirm that Colonel Nadine had a file at Mather Air Force Base. Here now to explain how Helen Luttrell first came forward about her extraordinary experience with her daughter Marissa and the E.T. human hybrid Rachel is writer and investigator Jean Bilodeau from Cedarville, California, followed by Helen Luttrell, mother of Marissa, an eyewitness to Rachel's eyes and face. And I do need the audio up, and I'm going to ask you guys to pretend that we are now transferred to Coast Radio.
I had done a series of stories on UFO sightings in my locality. It was run in the paper for 2 weeks running, and in the 100-year history of the newspaper, the Modoc County Record, it was the only 2 issues in the history to sell completely out. So there was a great deal of interest. Helen read the stories and called me, and she wanted to tell me about her daughter, Marissa. Helen's daughter became blind in high school from complications from diabetes. Marissa's great goal in life was to graduate from college and help people. She was a very compassionate girl. She went to the college housing counselor and applied for housing off campus, but it couldn't be very expensive. They found her a place that was quiet within walking distance of the school, but with the stipulation that she couldn't make the rent on her own. She needed a roommate. And it wasn't long, just a day or two, this colonel and his daughter, Rachel, came into the housing office and applied for housing for the daughter. Rachel had to have a special diet, and Marissa said, well, I have to have a special diet too. I'm diabetic. And they reached an agreement and became roommates. Marissa began to notice that Rachel pronounced each word very distinctly and almost in a monotone, a mechanical-sounding monotone. Rachel did say she had been raised on a military base, and there were no kids to play with, and so she didn't know all these things and didn't have anybody to go out on a date with. She did notice that Rachel was a bit clumsy, and that the special food that Rachel ate was always delivered in containers.
Anything that would identify the source?
She did not. What she did discover, though, on good days she could see light and dark, and she could, with a strong magnifying glass, kind of make out things. She wanted to know, what is this green stuff that Rachel brings? Before Rachel would eat it, she would freeze it. And Marissa went in one day when Rachel wasn't home and took a box out and examined it very carefully. And then she found a little red triangle with 3 black horizontal lines toward the base of it. She also noticed that Rachel always wore a scarf and wraparound sunglasses and long-sleeve shirts, even inside.
In spring of 1972, Helen Luttrell, then 40 years old, left her teletype work at McClellan Air Force Base in Sacramento for her first visit to her daughter Marissa, then 20 years old and blind from diabetes since her teens. Marissa's new apartment was within walking distance of American River College. Helen had not yet met Colonel Nadine, the so-called father of the new roommate, Rachel. But Helen knew he was supposed to be based out of Mather Air Force Base, also in Sacramento. That's the day Helen discovered what was behind Rachel's sunglasses.
I had stopped by to see how Marissa was doing, and standing in the open doorway because it was hot, I said, I wish I could meet Rachel. She sounds interesting. And just at that time, I heard someone coming up the stairs to the apartment on the second floor, and Marissa said, wait a minute, I think that is her. And she sort of just rushed in past us, but I could see she was very different. She'd forgotten something that she needed for the class, so she got it, and when she came back out, I guess she tripped on a rug or something, I don't know, but she was going to fall face forward, it looked like. There was no way that she was reaching out to break her fall, and I thought that was strange because usually, even if you have things in your arms, you still reach out and you try to save yourself. She was going to fall right between us. So I reached out and grabbed her arm, and she was wearing a long-sleeved jumpsuit, and she had a bandana tied around her head, down under her chin, and she had big black sunglasses on. I grabbed her arm to save her and kind of stood her back up, but as I did that, the sleeve to the jumpsuit flipped up, and I found myself hanging onto her arm, and it did not feel at all like real skin. It was really cool, which was unusual because it was such a hot evening.
And the strange, cool, mushroom-like feeling of her skin, and that you were not feeling bone?
I didn't. You would have felt the bone that comes right down into your wrist bone.
Mm-hmm.
That was where I touched her. I should have felt a bone. It felt spongy. Didn't feel firm like it should have. And as I stood her up, I'm still hanging onto her arm, and I'm looking right into her eyes.
Because her glasses fell?
Yep, they slipped down. They didn't fall off, but they'd slipped down on her nose. And I could see huge green eyes with vertical black slits.
And the color of that green?
Was avocado green, the inside of an avocado.
Were there any whites to the eye?
None.
So you're looking at solid avocado green with a vertical black slit?
Yeah.
So this would be closest to, would it be a reptile snake?
I guess it could be. I didn't think of it as that. I thought of it as a cat's eye.
Okay, what's the difference to you between a cat's eye and a snake eye?
I'm definitely afraid of reptiles. I love cats.
Well, usually a cat's vertical pupil might be a little wider than a snake's vertical pupil.
Oh, yes. It was not a wide slit. It was fairly narrow and deep black.
Deep black in the avocado green, like near the pit of an avocado.
Yes, yes.
She would have to have something that would support the body. We know insects have an exoskeleton, whereas we and other animals have interior skeletons that prop us up.
I thought she was attractive, but a drawing I have made in my book, she is not pretty. She had kind of orangish hair, not really very thick, but it was curly a little bit. Her eyes were awfully big.
So you may have had your mind affected by something that Rachel was doing to make her appear a certain way to you even then.
It's very possible she may have projected into my mind an image of a person that was attractive.
What about photographs? Did you or Marissa ever take photographs of Rachel?
No, and we should have. I don't know why we didn't.
What happened at that second when Rachel knows that you are looking at her eyes that she has been working so hard to keep covered with those glasses?
Well, for just a moment, I was really terrified because I had never seen anything like that. Then I could see that there was fear in her eyes. She was afraid because she knew that I knew she was not who she was made out to be.
Meaning that she was not human.
Yes.
So what happens next?
Well, I stood her up, and Marissa introduced us, and Rachel said, and she spoke in a real monotone, no inflection. It was, "I am very pleased to meet you." And I said, "Well, I'm pleased to meet you too, Rachel." And then she said, "I must go."
Wow.
And she hurried on down the stairs. So then I told Marissa, I have to go too, and we just didn't discuss that incident. There's a lot of things like that I think about after all these years. Well, we should have stood there and talked about that.
Well, now, what was the next interaction that you had with Marissa and Rachel?
Let's see, I think the next one was when we had a meeting, because obviously she told the colonel, her father, what had happened, and so he asked to have a meeting with me and Marissa, and he would give us some information about Rachel. And so we set up this appointment for one afternoon in the apartment, and we all sat there, and he started to talk about where she came from and a little bit about his background. And then all of a sudden, I don't remember hearing him talk, but all this information was in my mind.
So verbally, in the room, to you and Marissa, that's as far as you remember him speaking verbally, and after that, it was a telepathic download.
Right.
And this is coming from the Colonel Nadine. That day, did he say to you and to Marissa that he was in charge of humanization?
He was involved in that project at Four Corners.
Can you give some detail on how Colonel Nadine introduced to you and Marissa this humanization program, and what did he say about it?
Well, he gave the details of how she arrived there and how they had brought her up on the base. It was a project to see how well beings from another place could be integrated into our society. It was also an interspecies breeding program on another planet.
What does that mean?
Well, that would be a breeding program where they would probably take ovum from a human female and intermingle it with the beings on another planet.
Well, where did Rachel come from?
Zeta Reticuli.
Zeta Reticuli. Did the Colonel go into details about what was known about Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2?
Yes. He didn't go into the details.
But he said Zeta Reticuli was the home planet of Rachel's species?
Yes.
How did Rachel get to Earth?
She came in a ship that apparently had been making trips to Four Corners, and it brought geneticists and other scientists from Zeta Reticuli to work in conjunction with our scientists who were working underground at Four Corners.
Do you remember Colonel Nadine telling you details about why the United States government would be working with extraterrestrial biological entities from Zeta Reticuli on this planet, doing a humanization program, helping the extraterrestrials have an underground territory to raise hybrids?
He told me that the exchange scientists from Zeta Reticuli were using the underground facilities at Four Corners to help teach some of our foremost scientists and physicians about the use of artificial blood and possibilities of transplants of organs like fingers and eyes and organs that had never been transplanted before.
If Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 scientists have the ability to extend life and make new organs and clone bodies, why would they need Earth?
I never could figure that out, except that there must have been, as you said before, some sort of a treaty where there was some exchange going on, but I don't know what the incentive would have been to us, except knowledge.
Did Colonel Nadine talk to you specifically about animal mutilations and human abductions?
That there was an agreement that humans could be abducted, but that was supposed to have been stopped by a certain time, but it never did get stopped.
Which means that the non-humans, wherever their real source is, are not telling the truth to the government.
Well, I believe that.
Did Colonel Nadine give you some explanation about why that civilization from Zeta Reticuli needed to mutilate animals and abduct humans?
He didn't. It's as if I were programmed to just accept what was told to me and don't ask any questions.
What did he tell you about his relationship with Rachel, how it started and what happened?
Well, at Four Corners, when he was first assigned there, he was on what was called the Blue Team, the crew that went out whenever there was a ship coming in, and if they were in trouble, his team would go out and try to recover any occupants that they could or put out the fire or whatever they could do. And this one particular one that they went out to investigate, they saw that it was going to crash. And so they stood by, and Rachel was thrown out, I believe, in a part of it when it crashed. And then he could see a little movement in it, and so he got her out. And she only had some minor burns, I believe, on her arms. And by the time he got her out, they were beginning to heal themselves up. She was going to be a survivor, so he took her back to the base medical facility, which was also underground, and there were female nurses. She could talk a little understandable language, and he just right from the very first, when he saw her still in that burning piece of craft, he felt a bond with her.
Telepathically.
Yes, he had this bond, and he had never had it with anybody before.
So he feels compassion and emotion for this extraterrestrial biological creature that he has taken out of this crash. And the crash was near...
It was near Four Corners.
Four Corners area was set up with the underground installation specifically for extraterrestrials from Zeta Reticuli to be working on hybridization and having a base on Earth.
Right.
Did Colonel Nadine ever say anything about what the chronological age of Rachel was?
Well, they didn't know, but they had asked her if she knew how old she was. And she told them that where she came from, they didn't have a concept of age in years. It was just how you were, was what she said. But they figured she was probably around 14. They already had that one scientist, Chisky, helped in formulating something for her to eat and drink. He didn't even know.
He was in charge of food for Rachel. What would that be?
Well, I think it was the same thing that she ate exclusively when the girls lived together. I did not see it, but my daughter did, and although she was technically blind, her sight fluctuated a lot, as it does with diabetes. She saw what looked like warmed over frozen spinach. She said it was awful looking, but yet she wanted a taste of it, and Rachel wouldn't let her. She said it wouldn't be good for her. But Rachel had to eat nothing but that, and she also could drink nothing but a special liquid.
This ties into this issue of information over the years has been at least some of the extraterrestrials have a fluid in their body that is chlorophyll and not like our blood.
And that sort of goes back to when the colonel rescued her out of that burning piece of craft, because he could see that she had cuts on her arms. But as he pulled her out to safety, then he could see that those were beginning to heal, but the little blood that was on the outside was very pale. Blood has a thicker consistency to it. But this was like what you would call a serum. And it was pale pink. Not chlorophyll, but it was not blood either.
This scientist, Shisky, what kind of scientist was he?
Well, he was a geneticist. He was in charge of the interspecies breeding program.
Interspecies breeding program.
Yes.
Why would the United States be participating with extraterrestrials on an interspecies breeding program?
Well, I don't really have a good answer for that, except to say that I think they are continuing to do it. They've done it for years and years. And our government is never going to tell us. They're never going to admit to this.
But why are they doing it in the first place?
I think because they need to know how to fabricate some beings that can travel back and forth safely between the different planets.
What happened to Rachel and Marissa living together?
Well, they got along really well, and they were very close friends. At the very end, it was after I had discovered she wasn't from here. My daughter came home for lunch one day. Usually Rachel was there. But this one day, she wasn't. And my daughter had looked in the bedroom or felt around in Rachel's bedroom, and everything was gone. My daughter was really upset. And she sat down on the bed. She looked around, and then she saw something attached to the mirror on the dresser. And she went over and took it off, and what it said was, "You have been a very good friend, Marissa, and I will miss you very much. I have left you a gift." And then my daughter realized that she had read the note, and she was legally blind, but she could read that. And she realized that the gift that Rachel had left her was the gift of sight.
Amazing.
And then she called me at work and told me what had happened. She didn't know what to do. She was really beside herself. So I said, well, I have this friend Bill in security, and he'd been a friend for quite a long time, and he owed me a couple of favors. So I thought, well, I'll call him and see if he can find out anything where the colonel is, and that'll give me a clue for Rachel. Actually, he is the one that had verified that the Colonel and Rachel had really come from Four Corners in the beginning, and that I would be able to find out nothing more about it because it was really, really top secret. So I told him what had happened, that Rachel disappeared. He checked master base and see where the Colonel is. And so he checked and he called me back in just a few minutes. Those records have been pulled. There is nothing to be found on him. He's gone.
So Colonel Nadine disappeared at exactly the same time that Rachel disappeared from Marissa's apartment, but Rachel left Marissa the gift of sight.
Right, and it wasn't full sight. And it fluctuated, but it was just a lot better. It was a wonderful gift.
Now, what happened to Rachel?
Well, ultimately, I was abducted sometime after that, and I was shown some of her, what I call handlers. They were government people. They eliminated her.
How many extraterrestrial human hybrids now live on the surface of this planet, let alone underground?
I certainly don't want to think about being replaced, but I don't know, and that's part of the problem, too. Nobody knows the real answer because we're not sure that we can trust the extraterrestrials.
When she used the word eliminated, the government says terminated. It's Helen Luttrell's understanding that a decision was made that Rachel was too much of a problem and it wasn't working out, and she was killed. And the colonel, whose record disappeared from Mather Air Force Base, Jean and Helen tried for 5 or 6 years. They contacted me early on when they were working on this project. And the whole goal was if we could find this colonel, his real name, and if he would talk to us as he had talked with Marissa and Helen, this would be a huge breakthrough, and nothing has ever surfaced. And 10 years after that, approximately 1982, Marissa, who had married, was having a very, very happy life, Helen thought, and that her being able to see even better ever since Rachel had given her the gift of better sight had made her life livable. And she and her husband were at a Christmas party in 1982, and everybody was happy and laughing, and Marissa suddenly dropped dead on the floor. And no one knows why. There never was an explanation, and Helen doesn't know whether to think of it as something that's sinister or not. Now, this is the first time, this is the first month of my life that I have had anything that I thought I could at least share something with the public of an evolving story that has come through a researcher named Anthony Sanchez. How many people in here have read UFO Highway? Maybe 7. I'm going to share this morning with you some information from him, but I would like to recommend that he and I are talking about how we can do a lot more work on his book that appeared in 2010 and 2011. He had 2 updated editions. And you can't find this book today. He thinks, and other people think, that it was vacuumed up. And so I feel it is important, but this is really heavy duty. This goes so much further than anything I have presented to you. And I want to go this next step a little ways, and then I want to take your Q&A. But I want you to know that Anthony and I are going to do a lot more work, and I'm going to have a tremendous amount of material at earthfiles.com, because this month in my August Coast to Coast AM, a Dreamland, and a series that I'm going to unfold at Earth Files, I will be on the last Thursday of this month for 3 hours, and I'm going to make at least 2 half hours from the interview. What I'm going to share this morning is not edited, but it is a segment that I think is extremely important. It relates to Helen Luttrell. It relates to everything that I've shared with you in the first workshop and the lecture. The focus of this, we've been in Nevada. We're talking about hybrids underground in a vast installation at Area 51, not too far from Las Vegas. And now we're going to move to northern New Mexico and the notorious Dulce. And all of us have heard about underground levels at Dulce going back to the early 1980s. Nobody has ever been able to prove it. There have been several substantive whistleblowers. The strongest said that he had worked as a security guard named Thomas C., who talked with his girlfriend, who talked with John Lear. That goes back to the mid-'80s, the famous story that the security guard had snuck out some videotape and photographs of these different levels where gray extraterrestrials were mixing and matching genes to make all kinds of life forms. And nobody believed it then. Nobody had any context to believe it. I was very dubious, but Dulce never went away. And where we're going to go now, even if it has to remain in the anonymous source level, it is another U.S. Air Force lieutenant colonel that gave the download to Anthony Sanchez. And let's right now just look at a map. The red circle is Dulce. It's 85 miles northeast of Farmington in Aztec, where there was another very important craft retrieval back in March of 1948, we think. It's very close to the Colorado border, where on the other side of the border is one of 2 Archuleta mesas that cross the New Mexico-Colorado border there. And this is where, allegedly, there are many levels underground that include extraterrestrial territories where genetic experimentation, cloning, and hybridization programs are ongoing. For the first time, talking with Anthony, it came into focus when he said that the colonel introduced to the underground hybridization program in the 70s, like the first colonel was brought into the humanization program in Nevada in 1956, that he got the clear understanding in his briefing that all of the underground installations under Dulce had been there for thousands, perhaps millions of years. The opening quote of the book is by a U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel X that Anthony Sanchez interviewed about the colonel's work in this other ET human hybrid project underground, the Archuleta Mesas near Dulce, New Mexico. He told Anthony, quote, "If you had told me half the things we would read in those briefing documents that I saw, I would have said you were insane," close quote. Now, the background, briefly, is that on January 6, 2010, in Placer County, California, between Sacramento and Lake Tahoe, that Anthony Sanchez conducted a confidential interview with a retired United States Air Force lieutenant colonel regarding a classified incident that took place in 1979 at a secret U.S. government base in Dulce, New Mexico. How can it be a government base and an extraterrestrial long-time genetic program? Some of you may know or have seen some of the work by Tal Levesque. Is anybody familiar with Tal Levesque's work? Well, in the early 80s, he was a very close friend of Bill Hamilton, who was also involved in investigations, and Tal Levesque spent a lot of time with me showing me documents. And perhaps the most important thing that Tal told me was that his father, Tal Levesque's father, worked for the Department of Energy, that was the Atomic Energy Commission when we exploded the bombs, and that it is the AEC and the Navy that have all of the really hot material from all of the evolution of this government on extraterrestrial matters, and that they have used the Air Force and the Army and intel agencies, and that redirects the American taxpayer's mind away from where the true source of all the material that we want to see. It's always been under the U.S. Navy and the Atomic Energy Commission, as they have changed names and assignments and special access projects. They were the original ones, and they have most of what we want. And according to this lieutenant colonel, he was assigned to a Dulce Special Medical Detachment in 1979. So 56 on Colonel Nadine. This colonel gets to Dulce in 1979. Quote, "Due to the enigmatic nature surrounding the UFO phenomenon and the potentially adverse consequences of publicly disclosing highly classified information, the colonel has been granted anonymity," close quote. That's what Anthony. And this is why this is so difficult. The classifications of this kind of information is because the government thinks that none of us can handle any of this, right? And that people have been killed over and over and over in the 50s, the 60s, and at least some of the 70s, who had information like what I'm sharing with you this morning, and they were killed to keep it from reaching the public. And then, somewhere in the early 80s, I was told that policy began to change. One time I was at a conference, and I never saw the man's face. I had been speaking, it was, I think, Eureka Springs, and I was feeling I started to say attacked, and that's not quite right. I was feeling like I was being impinged by all kinds of indirect, heavy-duty pressure on me to stop everything I was doing. And I had said that out loud at the conference, that I was concerned about myself and other people investigating something that I, as an American journalist, felt that I had every right in the world to try to keep going, to understand what other life forms there could be in the universe and why our government would have such a severe policy of denial about it, and why in the United States, growing up as an American, I should feel that my life was threatened in investigating matters that the government denied were even existing. But I did feel threatened. A lot of people felt threatened. And at that conference, a man ran up when I was surrounded by a whole bunch of people that were asking me questions. And I felt his air, I felt his, the heat of his voice in my right ear. And he said, "I know that you are worried about whether you will survive. I know that you are worried about what the government could do. I'm here to tell you, don't worry, keep going and doing what you're doing." And he was gone.